So I think some of the challenges that people have put to us, and I think are very valid and things that we need to tackle, are firstly, the idea of calling for a treaty is quite ambitious. And so are we scaring some countries off by making this grand call for a treaty? And our response to that is that we've created, or we're trying to work towards an agreement that doesn't rely on every country being at the table at the beginning. It's about creating global norm changes and about getting a critical mass of pioneering countries that are willing to take the first step towards creating this global framework on phasing out fossil fuels, and then using their influence to start to bring others to the table. I think one of the other challenges is the time that it might take to get to a treaty. And it's a very valid concern, but I think we've learned from historic examples, and nuclear weapons is one of them. If you look at the most recent treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which came about as a result of mass global movements and a civil society campaign calling for a ban on nuclear weapons, because the previous non-proliferation treaty didn't go that far. And we've seen from examples like that and examples like the landmine ban treaty and others that it is possible, if you have kind of the right political window and a global campaign, to actually bring about quite rapid shifts in the international space. And I think right now we're at one of those moments. The global pandemic has shown that things that we maybe previously didn't think were possible from governments might be. And so we really want to grasp that. And so there is a real possibility that we could come to an agreement quite quickly, but also the process towards getting there is equally as important in terms of mobilizing campaigns. And so I guess that takes me to the next part of the question, which is about steps. And I think we think about this in kind of twofold. So there's the treaty itself, which is the tool that we're working towards, which is a legal framework on phasing out fossil fuels and a global just transition. And then there's the pathway towards the treaty, which is the global campaign and the political pathways. And so our next steps are really about building that campaign and mobilizing a global coalition of partners who are working in this space at the grassroots and at the national level. It's about carving out the political pathways by working with governments, but also working with subnational governments. So something that we're doing now and we've seen some success with is starting to work with cities, because cities have the ability firstly to regulate themselves and to stop fossil fuel production within their area, but also to put pressure on national governments. And actually the city of Vancouver recently passed a motion calling for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, and they're the first in the world. And they then wrote to both the provincial and national governments calling for them to take action on fossil fuel supply. So that can be really powerful. And then we also have a huge program of work working with researchers to try and build the evidence base that helps support all of the work that we're doing, and engaging with countries at the national level to help them think through the challenges of dealing with the supply side of fossil fuels and how they might implement their own national policies, but also start to work together to create international cooperation. And I can probably talk about this in a bit more detail, but one key project that we're working on that's a major stepping stone is the global registry of fossil fuels, which is basically the idea of setting up a transparency mechanism that will help to underpin any global agreement that does come about. I should just briefly say in terms of the legal pathway towards a treaty, there are many ways that can happen. It can either, we may have a treaty that's negotiated through one of the spaces like the UN General Assembly or another UN body, or we might have a treaty that's negotiated outside of that space. And what's most important at this point is really getting the momentum and bringing countries on board. And then we don't intend, we want to bring countries to the table, and then the actual drafting of the treaty will be the prerogative of countries themselves. And so they'll develop the legal framework, because this really is meant to be a country-driven process.